All right, I'm going to half agree and half disagree with our next guest. So it should be fun. Sarah Rumpf is a contributing editor at Mediaite and Law Crime, and she recently talked about outrage on both sides. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. All right, Sarah, I'm going to start by reading a paragraph of yours, and then we're going to debate it, okay? So this should be fun. And I'm going to probably mispronounce one of the words, so that's extra fun, okay? So you'll correct me in a second. You wrote over and over again, we have this Ouroboros of outrage. That's such a fun word, okay? With one side getting angry about something, distorting or omitting key context, demanding a strong response, while the opposing side gets mad at the outrage, spins up their own outrage and says they're being targeted, and everyone just screams at each other until the next Dr. Seuss book or M&M fashion scandal comes along to spark a new battle. And by the way, you wrote that a couple of weeks ago, and voila. Today we had an M&M outrage story. So about the ginned up outrage, I couldn't agree more. But it sounds like you're blaming both sides, and that I couldn't disagree more with. So, but before we get to any of that, how do you pronounce Ouroboros?
I'm pretty sure that's close to correct. That's a figure from Greek mythology, and that's the snake that is biting and eating its own tail, so self-consuming, like eating itself. And that does feel like that's what a lot of the news cycle feels like a lot of the time.
All right, that's a badass reference. You gained a lot of points for that. Okay, now, Sarah, what are we supposed to do? So Tucker Carlson or whoever else it is comes up with something where they're gonna target trans people. And they say, like in fact, today on the show we covered North Dakota is trying to ban people from using their correct names if they're transgender. They want you to use the old pronouns and the old names, otherwise you're gonna get fined $1,500. So there's a proposed bill, it hasn't passed. And then in West Virginia, they're saying that if a transgender person talks to someone in an entertaining way, they might go to prison for a year. Well, am I supposed to say, oh yeah, great, rock and roll, I don't want to participate in the outrage machine, so go ahead and discriminate against people?
No, and I don't, I think maybe there's a misinterpretation of my argument, because those statutes are insane. Like I wrote in the article that I think got your producer's attention, banning a teenager from seeing a Shakespeare play or watching Mrs. Doubtfire is not reasonable. And the way that they're writing all these laws is completely insane and should be pointed out as such. What I was pointing out in the article was that Mehdi Hassan and Parker Malloy were conflating a lot of things at once, and the specific Fox News segments. And I can, my email account that I pick on Fox News more than once. But this specific segment was having a freak out over the specific Joker comment, but attributing all of these plans and legislation and everything to them isn't, the connection I didn't think was quite there. And I used to practice law, and my understanding is that you're a lawyer as well. When you have your best argument, you present that first. I think it would have been a little more effective to just absolutely ridicule Fox melting down because they couldn't read an 8 or 10 page comic. I mean, this was not what they said it was at all. It was a one-off, goofy, Silver Age style comic, which, those are all written in the 60s and 70s. Every daggone one of those comic book writers was high on something. It's supposed to be silly, it's supposed to be absurd, and it's marketed to teenagers. This is not trying to convince your 6-year-old to be a transgender whatever commie that Fox News is so worried about all the time. This is a goofy, silly story about a magician and casting a spell on the Joker. It had nothing to do with transgender people. He was not pregnant. The whole thing was dumb. I feel like it should have been a separate conversation. Like, analyze these idiotic bills. That's one thing. Make fun of Fox News for trying to gin up outrage over M&ms shoes and dumb comics when they don't even understand what they're talking about. They're separate things. That was the point.
Well,
you are right.
Yeah. So Sarah, first of all, in terms of making fun of Fox News for their fake outrage, mission accomplished. We also did that on Monday's show. And we had a great time with the M&M story. Tucker Carlson doesn't find the M&M spokes candies sexually appealing enough, so M&M had to had to restructure their whole marketing campaign so Tucker Carlson could get off on it. I think that's hilarious. Okay, I'm not the one going around going, "Hey, I want the sexy shoes back on." And look, I don't want to know about Tucker's foot fetish or whatever the hell else he's got going on, and the candy fetish. They're weirdos. Okay. So no problem making fun of them. Check. We do it every day. No problem. But Sarah, there's a different issue too, though. So as a progressive show, we cared a lot about $15 minimum wage. So we did a whole campaign, and we actually got Bernie Sanders to introduce it as an amendment to the original COVID relief plan. That was our audience, thousands of signatures, et cetera, made an impact in politics. And then 8 Democrats voted against it, and we got them on the record as pretending to be in favor of minimum wage and then actually being against it. You know how much coverage it got? 0, okay? Tucker Carlson says, I can't masturbate enough to the M&Ms. Everybody in the world covers it, and we all have to discuss it for weeks and weeks. And in fact, it changes the Mars company's marketing strategy. So how the hell do we fix that?
You know, this is something that I've wrestled with myself because I am still digging into. I live in Florida, and Ron DeSantis's idiotic plan to revoke the Reedy Creek Improvement District at Walt Disney World. Actually analyzing that requires digging into a lot of like obscure paperwork and building codes and tax codes and municipal bonds, and trying to get people interested in those things is a challenge, and trying to get people to pay attention to these things that, you know, whether you're on the right or left or whatever, there are these issues that affect you and that people, you know, they care about when it adversely affects them. But it is a lot funnier to watch a clip of Tucker Carlson melting down because he thinks that the M&Ms are not appropriately attired. You know, trying to distill a complicated legal or policy issue into a 30-second soundbite is an absolute challenge. And, you know, the only thing I guess we can all try to do is just, I don't know.
No,
Sarah, you're absolutely right that it's a huge problem.
Yeah. So Sarah, look, we've been accused of almost everything in the world, right, at the Young Turks, except not being entertaining enough. So we're engaged in 1,000 fights, and there's conflicts, and there's drama, and there's humor, and there's everything in the world, right? No, so let me run my theory by you. I think corporate media wants us distracted, and by corporate media, I mean mainstream media acting as good cop, right-wing media acting as bad cop, and they're actually working together. So they start a fake fight. Fox News almost always does, the right wing does. Oh, Mr. Potato Head, whoever else, right? Dr. Zeus, right? And then the mainstream media goes perfect, right? And they all do this nonsense fight that doesn't affect anything, or is playing defense against taking away people's rights, et cetera. Meanwhile, on economic issues, I think they agree on everything. And I think that the distraction is not an accident. I think it's on purpose. And so when you do student debt relief, when Biden suggested that, all of a sudden Stephanie Ruhle on MSNBC is livid about it. And so is Tucker Carlson. And so is Anderson Cooper. On every economic issue, they all actually agree. Isn't that weird?
Well, we have a problem where an awful lot of the media at the big companies, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, all those, the big label ones, come from, they might have different diversity boxes checked, but as far as socioeconomic status goes, they all went to Ivy League schools. They're all from very wealthy backgrounds. A lot of them are, very blessed to be in a generational wealth sort of situation. And you see that same thing with Congress. Because it is so expensive to live in DC, the vast majority of Capitol Hill staffers are extremely wealthy. Because your choice is, you can't get a Capitol Hill job without a Capitol Hill job. So to get those entry-level positions, you either live with 5 roommates out in Maryland somewhere, or daddy pays your rent. So we have the bills being written, researched, reviewed, and studied by people who have never, ever, ever had to worry about, do I need to wait to go to the grocery store until my next paycheck clears? We have the news being covered by people who are in that exact same situation. And it's that is beyond partisan politics. I have often thought I would love to be able to force the entire every single congressional representative and every single one of their staffers, when was the last time you held off making a big purchase? When was the last time you delayed going to the doctor? When was the last time you waited to go to the grocery store because of finances? And just seeing how few people even are able to put even a remote year on that question, if ever in their lives, would be an extraordinarily depressing thing.
Yeah, one more thing, Sarah. First of all, you're entirely right about that. No question. And that is part of what forms groupthink. But hiring also forms groupthink. So when you have an extremely wealthy publisher hiring people who think like he does as editors and producers and reporters, hey, look at that. It turns out everybody thinks that the next $1 trillion tax cut for the rich is perfectly normal. But if we were going to do Medicare for all, which every other developed nation on earth has, oh, how are you going to pay for that? Oh, that's an outrage. That helps the American people. We despise it. So I just think all of it is theater. And I'll end on this example, corruption. Because the groupthink alone doesn't just answer the fact that they come from wealthy backgrounds. Because corruption is an intensely interesting story in every country. So, you go to Turkey, Israel, or whatever, the different places that I've been, etc. Corruption is usually the #1 story. People are outraged by it. They don't like it. It drives a lot of viewership, readership, etc. And America is, I would argue, is the single most corrupt country in the whole world because we legalize bribery. You can just hand them the money. You can give them hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's perfectly legal, right? So, and we all know that the politicians work for the donors. That's the most obvious thing in the world. Yet no one writes about it and no one ever talks about it on TV. That can't all be a coincidence. So my point isn't that they wrote a memo about it and that there's some conspiracy. My point is the invisible hand on the market, through the processes that you and I have talked about, have set this up so that we're all distracted by the m&ms and Mr. Potato Head while they rob the place blind with their friends in Washington. And that both Anderson Cooper and Tucker Carlson, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune and the heir to the Swanson fortune, are both thrilled with how distracted we are. What do you think?
Well, and you're absolutely right about that. And I will say, we've got to take care of local media. A lot of times the real digging into the corruption is done by local on the ground reporters. An awful lot about what we know about the Uvalde shooting is because of great work by reporters with the Texas Tribune. And people that were on the ground there and interviewing people and getting in their face with a microphone. And even here in Orlando and in Florida, a lot of the stories that are really important have been covered by people who are here on the ground, not reporting from New York or DC. So it's something that we've got to invest in. We've got to be willing to subscribe to local media outlets and support them and drive traffic to them, and not just always get the news from the national stations.
Yeah, I used to think the best reporters in the world worked at the New York Times. I now think, with a couple of notable exceptions, the worst reporters work at the New York Times. Because the bigger the publication is, the more they have to kiss the ass of the powerful. It becomes a controversial thing to challenge a congressman or a senator, or to say that they are corrupt because they took millions of dollars from corporate donors. That's very forbidden among the giant publications and news outlets. Well, that's true though, it's true. That's why you have to go to independent news to get anything that's true, because the giant media outlets won't print something that's true under penalty of law. So that's why we have the upside down system that we have. By the way, Sarah writes for Mediaite, and that's among the reasons why I read Mediaite. Because I brought you on here, we agree and disagree on some things I said, and that's what I expected. But you guys actually do a pretty good job of saying, here's the news, whether you like it or you don't, right? And it's more of an independent outlet. If Mediaite gets bigger, there'll be tons of forces. The powerful will then close in and go, nope, don't say that, don't say this. You're gonna get in a lot of trouble if you say that, and you might lose your advertisers if you say that, right? So enjoy working there, because if you go to any bigger publication, you're screwed. They'll never let you do journalism.
Well, I will say I do have to sing the praises of the guy that owns our site, Dan Abrams, because he said multiple times in our staff calls and other conversations and emails, like he wants us to have our own opinion, just click that opinion tag. And we've never had any sort of viewpoint dictated to us. He just wants us to be able to back up and coherently and logically argue what we're trying to argue. So I work with people who are very sincerely, devoutly progressive and very sincerely, devoutly conservative and all shades in between. And I really like that. I've worked some other places that have been more ideologically confined in one way. And this is a lot more refreshing. And I feel like it's a check on me too, because if I'm not really doing a good job of dotting my I's and crossing my T's, one of my coworkers will call me out on it. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I like and respect Dan. And funny enough, right now as we speak, as we're taping this interview, Dan Abrams and Senator Nina Turner, who's one of our hosts, does the show On Boss for us, are talking on News Nation. So at least there's some good like-minded folks out there trying to fight for the right things, no matter where they are on the political spectrum. And Sarah Rumpf is one of them, so check her out on Mediaite and Law and Crime. Sarah, thank you for joining us, we appreciate it.